Welcome to Ace of Pentacles, your career strategy and workplace wellness podcast. I'm your host, Sara, and I'm so happy you're here. Join me every week as we investigate how people design and discover their way through their careers. Together, we'll explore the science of well-being at work and discover tools and strategies to help us do well and be well. Sneha Koka is a leader in the operations organization at Nvidia, with previous experience as a manufacturing engineer at Tesla during the Model 3 launch and at Linde and Caterpillar prior to that. She currently leads the capacity planning team at Nvidia. Her background is in industrial engineering, and she has spent about 15 years tackling complex challenges in dynamic business environments in multiple industries, including semiconductor, automotive, and chemical. Her recent challenges in the Silicon Valley have been focused on implementing solutions to enable exponential scalability. Outside of work, Sneha is a mom of 2 young boys, 2 and 4. For fun, she loves biking with her family, hiking and exploring nature in their camper van, and doing pottery on the wheel. Sneha loves to creating art, creating solutions, and creating new memories and experiences is something she thrives on. Sneha also loves to bring people together. She became a mom for the first time during the COVID-19 pandemic, a time when many parents started to leave the workforce as a result of losing their standard support systems they relied on. Sneha continued to take on bigger challenges at work while intentionally looking to grow in her personal life. Always having been a lover of nature and the outdoors, Sneha leaned into that aspect of her life, even as a new parent, and found ways to incorporate outdoor adventures into her family's routine. A friend told her that following Sneha's outdoor adventures was inspiring her to come up with innovative ways to balance both work and family time. This, in turn, inspired Sneha to share her outdoor nature explorations and van life on the weekends, hoping to inspire more parents to find creative ways to meet their goals holistically and not have to step away from their professional goals unless it's truly what they wanted. In this conversation, Sneha opens up about her journey as an engineer, a leader, and a mom, offering a thoughtful glimpse into how she balances these roles. She shares how embracing honesty about her needs and desires, combined with an engineering mindset for solving everyday challenges, has empowered her to build a life she truly enjoys. Sneha also reflects on her diverse background and experiences that have shaped her ability to show up authentically in every aspect of her life. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Sneha Koka. Hi, Sneha, how are you?
Good. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Sneha, thank you so much for being here and for agreeing to be interviewed for my podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been really exciting seeing you bring people together to share their experiences and their diverse perspectives, and everybody else having access to this information and learning more new things.
Thank you. Sneha, I wanted to invite you to speak to us because I've been thinking a lot about authenticity. And in a lot of ways, this podcast is set up to help people learn more about who they are through learning about other people and how they've figured out their way through their careers. And you're someone who I've experienced to kind of show up in the world very authentically, and you do it in this beautiful, very organic way. And I really admire that about you. And so I wanted to invite you to speak to us about your career, which I think has been really interesting, but especially about your perspective on how you've built your career and how you've managed to do it in a very authentic way.
Sure. That really connects with me. Honestly, I am still a relatively new manager in a leadership position, and I remember I was pretty overwhelmed when I first got this opportunity, and I was chatting with some of my mentors. And one of my mentors reminded me that, hey, one of the secret skill set that you have is you're just able to connect with people one on one. Don't forget that. And the layers of the onion of what enables that. And part of that is vulnerability. Part of that is showing up honestly with the value systems of what you believe in, but also the willingness to listen, understand different perspectives, have a dialogue, really,
Yeah.
so that you're able to meet others when you meet them where they are and not just with the mindset of where you're coming from. But that's been something because somebody at work had observed, and it had actually encouraged me to step into a leadership role, has helped me lean into it as I have been in cross-functional roles for quite a long time now, and I've been able to leverage that as a strength. Um, yeah, to be able to collaborate with a diverse set of perspectives.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Let's go ahead and dive in by starting here. Let's start with tell us a little bit about you, your background, what got you to where you are today.
Okay. So I was born and raised in India for early part of my life, and then I moved to Eastern Europe, Romania and Hungary, and then I came to the U.S. as an international student. It was a challenging time to be a college student at the time I was, because it was right around when the recession hit. And I had seen so many peers of mine, after having worked really hard to get a degree here, they had to leave because they weren't able to find a full-time job. And there's a lot of challenges just to make sure you're applying for a loan, you have the investment for your education. It's an investment in the future. Um, and I think at the time it was because of I saw a lot of people having challenges. Um, I realized it was a numbers game, and I remember I did like almost 300 to 400 applications to get my first full time job, which yes, many people do, but at the same time, it was just, how do I make sure I maximize likelihood of success, right? I don't think I ever had a clear path or a step by step guide on how to meet my goals. But one thing for me, I think I always had a clear idea of my 1, 3, 5 year goals, even though I didn't have clarity on how I was going to get there. And then what was really important is just having a support system, mentors, guides who are going to call you out on your blind spots. Um, so anyhow, I think partly luck, partly preparation. I did end up getting a full time role. My background's in industrial engineering, and I went to college in Rochester, New York, which if some people know, you get a lot of lake effect snow, so there's a lot of gray skies during the winter time, which is shocking to adjust to. And then I worked in the chemical industry at a company called Linde, and then I had studied about the NUMMI factory that's here in Fremont, California, when it wasn't Tesla in my textbooks when we were studying about lean manufacturing. And I was looking for a challenge because the role that I had in Linde, the manufacturing facilities were far away from the corporate office. And I felt like early in my career, I just wanted to learn, learn, learn. And I had to travel. I would apply some of the learnings, but I was never there to see the results. I wasn't able to iterate and improve quickly. There was a time lag, and I was just thirsty for knowledge, and I was thirsty for feedback. So I wanted to get into a role where I could roll up my sleeves, get my hands dirty, with a trade in manufacturing engineering, walk around the manufacturing floor with steel-toed shoes, and just implement changes, get instant feedback. Did it work? Did it not? And learn. So I happened to apply for a role at Tesla, and I got accepted. And then I moved to California. And so I spent about 4 years at Tesla as a manufacturing engineer. And then, I happened to look at a role in Nvidia, which brought me to the semiconductor industry, where it's a completely different challenge, where the complexity of the demand volatility as well as the capacity changes make it a much more complex dynamic problem to solve. So it was really my thirst for knowledge and feedback, which propelled me setting my goals. And then I just I enjoy having a dialogue. So I'm not afraid of having a dialogue with people who uh, enjoy the debate, call out my blind spots. I love that. I love learning about psychology, but turning it into like a math or engineering problem. So I enjoy those debates and dialogues. So I think that has been an asset as I have taken on challenges where I may not know the exact path to get to the goal. I've been able to leverage some of my mentors and guides to help me find strategies to minimize my blind spots. And yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
Yeah. Wonderful. I want to at some point dig into your I really like how you said, you're constantly looking for feedback, and that's something I've noticed about you. You're always seeking feedback. And I'm just curious about how, actually, let me ask you that right now. How does constantly seeking feedback, how does that help you show up more as who you are, knowing that the feedback is coming from somebody else's perspective? Or I feel like feedback sometimes sets an expectation that like you should be this way because somebody else thinks you should be that way. So how do you manage to balance that? How do you take in people's feedback, but then also integrate it in a way that helps you show up more as yourself?
Hmm. Yeah. I think it depends on the situational context.
Hmm.
If this is from a work situational context, you can turn it into what is the common goal that you're trying to achieve, and start peeling the layers of the onion to understand how could you reframe the other person's challenge, right? Because you might have multiple parties trying to achieve the same common goal, and you may only be seeing 30% of the challenge,
Hmm.
and it's the tip of the iceberg possibly, and everybody sees a different part of the tip of the iceberg, right? So it's a lot of reframing and understanding in the context of the goal. And if it's not from a work situation, let's say you're, I don't know, you're just having a beer with a couple of family friends who also have kids at a brewery that is kid friendly, and maybe somebody's sharing something. It's also kind of goal context oriented because everybody's values and priorities and maybe a little bit different. So there it might be a little bit different on maybe you pause before you share feedback because it may not even be applicable because everybody may have different goals, right?
Hmm.
So I think it depends in both.
Hmm. Okay. Um, Sneha, something that you and I have talked about a lot is leading with authenticity. And like I mentioned, I think you live very authentically, and I really admire that about you. You became a leader at a fairly early stage in your career, and I think it can be really hard to show up authentically in a role that we make such a big deal about. And it requires a lot of you, especially as a first time leader, right? And I think we do make a very big deal about leadership culturally. It's like when you become a leader, you stand out, you're above others in some way, like you have to be like this role model. It's a lot of pressure. So, Sneha, what are some of the challenges that come with moving from an individual contributor role to a leadership role, while also kind of maintaining that authenticity, bringing like who you are into that space?
Sure. Um, to tell you the truth, I have always been a data nerd. I read a lot, and when I somehow, even though I've tried to find different roles, somehow, no matter what role I'm in, I happen to get assigned to work that requires dynamic communication across multiple levels and multiple verticals. No matter how hard I try to run away from it, I just can't.
Hmm.
So when I came to Nvidia, I realized that okay, well, I just can't run from it anymore. So I've just got to focus on figuring out how I'm going to do this really well because in a role like this or these kind of challenges, it's hard to show up authentically to so many diverse set of audiences at the same time, right? So uh, the what helped me is the company culture at Nvidia really prioritizes intellectual honesty. And when I first joined the company too, I noticed when you have large meetings, there's always pauses of silence Where sometimes you're like, wait, am I, did everybody go on mute? Is my speaker not working? And then it took time. It's intentional. It's holding space for everybody to speak, even someone who may have the information or the answer, but um, needs a pause and some space in order to muster the courage to speak up. So every voice matters, not just the loudest voice. So being in that kind of environment, it helped me identify uh, traits that enable you to do this more often, more effectively, a little bit easier, lowering the barrier. And as I became a manager, it became really important for me to notice these things in the environment intentionally, because now it was an obligation to make sure I help enable that for the team, help enable, make sure that everybody's voice on the team is heard, their challenges are heard, and there's knowledge sharing happening. I didn't we didn't have I didn't have any very rigid training on this. Honestly, to tell you the truth, a lot of it is just, again, mentors, guides, um, at the company, as well as from my previous managers and from previous companies that I've kept in touch with, who've helped me strategize on how to tackle these situations. And I recently took a class about, which is best practices on how to be a collaborative engineering leader. And it's interesting, they talk about powerful questioning and using powerful questions to be more effective in your communication. It's something, there were some very specific guidelines on how you can leverage this to be able to support your team better, but not something that was tied into the standard training. But these type of being proactive to look for the resources, being proactive to look for knowledge, being proactive to be vulnerable, reaching out to people and saying, hey, here's a challenge I have and I don't know what to do. And it takes a lot to go to a mentor, a guide, or a sponsor and say, hey, I need help and here's where I'm stuck. Or here's some options I see. What do you think would be the best mechanism to approach this challenge, right? I think that type of proactive approach can really help everybody moving from an individual contributor to a manager to set themselves up for success. But if you're not vulnerable and willing to be vulnerable or willing to share your challenges, look for help, you can very easily uh, end up having some habits that maybe propelled you as an individual contributor, but may hinder you as you step into a leadership or a manager role.
I think one of the things that's the hardest thing to do, right, is asking for help. And I actually think jobs, careers in corporate America, especially as an individual contributor, add to that in a lot of ways. It's like if you want to stand out, right? If you're an individual contributor and you want to get promoted to a leader, like you have to constantly show your expertise. Do you think that prevents people from actually showing up in a curious way and asking questions and asking for help and being vulnerable?
You know, I'm pausing because it's been almost a decade that I've been in Silicon Valley
Mm,
working, right?
yeah.
And I feel like my answer is layered with a context of where I'm highly biased of responding relative to the experience in the past decade. And one of the traits that you see in a lot of high performing teams and companies um, is leaders who are willing to speak openly and speak truth to power, address the challenges so that you're able to ungate and unblock your teams, enable them to succeed. So, given that, um, yes and no. I think if you're in an environment with a work culture where you are seeing leaders openly address the challenges and enable the teams to succeed, that already means that there is a value. They're prioritizing intellectual honesty and teamwork, right? And that's important. And when you have that, um, in order to be successful, you need to raise the challenges to ask for help. because otherwise it could result in an issue long run, right, to the company. So it's in the best interest of the company for you to raise issues and collaborate with the teams to enable a successful strategy.
Yeah. All right, Sneha, we're gonna switch gears. I want to talk a little bit. I've seen you go through multiple life changes over the past a little over a decade. And one of the things that changed in your life is you became a mom. And I want to ask you, as a mom and as a woman of color working in corporate America, what are some of the challenges unique to your experience as a leader in a global tech company in Silicon Valley?
Sure. There's this video I had watched. This was before I was even, I think before I was married, before I had kids, where it was a webinar of like various leaders who shared information about their journey, their challenges, and strategies they've used to overcome them. And this was a video I had come across of a female leader who talked about there's only 24 hours in a day. It's a math problem. You can't do everything. And if you want to do everything you want to do and achieve your goals, you have to prioritize. And sometimes you have to prioritize daily. For some, that can be overwhelming. For some, that's an aha moment. So I fell in the latter. And honestly, I don't think I put the learnings from that video into place in my life until a few years after, when I was expecting a baby. It was right in the pandemic, when before even vaccines had come out, and then I was expecting a second baby 2 years later. And I wanted to grow in my role, and I still, I made the decision to apply for a new position and take on additional responsibility. And I had to come to terms with what does meeting my goals look like for me? What am I willing to drop off my plate in that 24-hour window? What am I willing to ask for help for? And that changed everything. But again, even here, I mean, I had mentors who I was able to just reach out to and talk to, who their kids are my age, but they still remembered when they were my age and they were going through the same struggles, and sharing some of the decision forks that had come up for me, and asking for advice. Or it wasn't really advice, it was more of a context for this challenge I'm going through is not something new. And the reason that was relevant was because this was the pandemic. So when there's no pandemic and everybody's going to work and everybody's socializing, people see you pregnant or postpartum, etc., and they say hello, and there's a lot of knowledge sharing, etc. But being in the pandemic, I mean, it was just hard to even reach out or get any thoughts on how to strategize this. So I had to be very intentional about looking for advice and reframing my challenge and identifying strategies to maximize likelihood of success, right? Of meeting the goal. But the one thing that's a fact is you do have only 24 hours in a day. So what you prioritize and what you do is essentially paving the way for what you want to spend time on next.
Yeah. I think that's excellent framing. I also want to call out, I think you're actually one of the few people that I know that is extremely good at seeking not just information from books and podcasts. You're very good at reaching out to people and building those connections in that community to learn, right? You go out and you find your mentors, and you go out and you find people that are kind of in the same phase of life as you are, going through similar things, and you actually are very good at extracting kind of knowledge and information, and you inquire about people's experiences. I think that I see that theme in your answers of making sure you're connecting with people that can help kind of guide you, down whatever path you're going on next.
No, I appreciate that. It's recently that I realized this is something that I do often. without as much intention. And part of it is because of a lot of the moves that I made growing up, I
Mhm.
identify with being a third culture kid. And when you think about what that really means, um, if you have growing up have spent a lot of time in an environment that is new, you've had a lot of practice calibrating. You've
Mhm.
had a lot of practice calibrating your mental model, your knowledge, yourself relative to the environment, relative to the situation, relative to others' perspectives. And in order to be able to collaborate, in order to be able to have a dialogue, sometimes there's a language barrier. Sometimes it's not the language itself, but maybe semantics with a cultural context. Then it's important to start meeting the person you're trying to have a dialogue with where they are, so that you can adapt your approach, right? So I think because of that, I have had enough, I guess, data to say, hey, it's worked, and I know it works. So I have less anxiety stepping into the unknown because of that, which can sometimes be hard. But once you start intentionally doing it more, you could lower the barrier for yourself
Yeah.
as it becomes like a familiar jacket that you wear.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great segue into my next question that I was going to ask you was actually about your experience with all these moves throughout your life. Your family is from India and they immigrated to Romania. You grew up in Romania and then you went to college in the US. And even within the US, you moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. And you've done a lot of moving in your life, and that requires a lot of flexibility, a lot of adaptability. And it seems like that, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like one of the skills that you've picked up along the way is how to build community, how to reach out to people, how to learn from their experiences. It's really a social skill. How do you think that the life that you've lived and all these experiences that you've had, moving and learning about new cultures and assimilating into new cultures, how do you think that's impacted your ability to be a more authentic leader?
Um, I think because you always have to calibrate with who you are relative to the situation or the environment, and also, part of it is growing up at home. I was an Indian. I was brought up in an Indian household. So the language I was speaking while I was at home was different from the language I am speaking when I'm on my way to school, which was the local language. And then it's a different language once I'm in school because even though I was in Eastern Europe, I went to a school where we were speaking English. So you're transitioning three languages back and forth multiple times through the day, and that's just the routine. And then you're also transitioning multiple different perspectives, audience, um, and that enables you to just be a little bit more flexible and adaptable. And I think when you translate that back to work, it's not just about culture, but also if you think about different business functions, um, as you if you're speaking with an engineering org versus like a supply chain org, et cetera, the way you may need to communicate is a little bit different, and you have to still address a diverse audience at the same time. So it's by the way, I have so much opportunity here still. But the reason I say this is just that early on in my career, I had the opportunity to do a lot of cross functional collaboration work because I had this was in my comfort zone essentially. But even then, there is a lot of opportunity to intentionally work on as I continue to grow in my career.
Hmm. And Sneha, that's something that you're very good at is continuing to develop, continuing to work on anything that you identify as an opportunity or people have helped you identify as an opportunity. What are some resources that you have found helpful? Books, podcasts, as we think about this living authentically and showing up as more yourself, or being a leader that shows up authentically, what are some good books or resources or courses, anything that you can share with our audience that you've really relied on?
Sure. Um, I would say Grit, the book. That was eye-opening. Honestly, to tell you the truth, some of the realizations I had on where my strengths and opportunities were, this book had a framework to be able to digest and peel the layers. And that enabled me to organize my my understanding and reframe how I can leverage my strengths as well as strategies to address the opportunities, um, or convert them into strengths, depending on the situations or the challenges you take on. So grit was one that was really good. The other is culture map. Um, because I often am working in cross-functional teams, but also on projects that cross time zones and different organizations. And this is probably applicable not just to somebody working in a multinational company, but also somebody who may be trying to prepare for a client meeting, and the client is from a different culture or is in a different country, etc. Culture Map, I really love that book because they really did a great job at dissecting what are the variables and then turning it into a math problem with data and research that had been done over the past decade, to understand. And then it also enables you to understand where do you fall in this calibration. And being a third culture kid, I it was a bit of a challenge for me to gauge where do I fall in each of these variables, because there may be some aspects that I am tending to be more on the India side, and some that are more on the Romania side, and there's some that are more on the US side. And it was really data and learning about my own tendencies. So then I can, it enables you to adapt your communication style or your approach depending on the audience you're about to work with. There's two others that I would think of that's coming to my mind. One is Rage Becomes Her, and that one's really great for women. It's about developing strategies to overcome challenges and barriers with a context of a context of systemic policies that might already be in place, that may end up raising the barrier a little bit. And the fourth one, I almost forgot about this one, is Trevor Noah, the
Born a Crime.
Born a Crime. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about leading authentically,
Mm.
he has done an amazing job. And he so anyway, he's a I would definitely recommend that book.
Okay. Thank you. Sneha, we didn't get to talk about when we were talking about you being a mom and a
Oh
woman of
yeah.
color. We didn't actually get to talk about another aspect of your life, something that you've been developing a little bit more recently. I think I've kind of seen this change happen as you had kids, and you're very thoughtful about the way that you approach these different life phases. And one of the things you did recently was you bought a camper van, and you go on these trips on the weekend, you go camping, and you're really intentional about introducing your children to nature and helping them just be present and be in the moment. And I think that is so beautiful. I think you should have like a mom blog. You should be like one of those mommy influencers or something. But tell us a little bit about some of the stuff that you do outside of work that I think it very much adds to your ability to show up in the way that you do at work and in life.
Yeah. Um, I guess, when I talked about when the advice about there's only 24 hours in a day, and it's really important to define your priorities. Going back to that, I mean, you can't 100% just split work and personal life. It's near impossible, right? So when I set those priorities, part of it was a holistic list of priorities. And how do you shape your work and personal life so that they can complement each other? And there's a sense of flexibility and adaptability so that you're still able to meet your goals and do what you love to do. And one of those things was I really enjoy spending time with my kids. And especially my older son is now 4 years old. There's a book, I'll have to share it later. I don't remember the name, but it's about how philosophy. I think it's a philosophy of the young child or something. And it's really interesting. It talks about just speaking truth to power with kids and not necessarily limiting the information you're sharing with them. Recently, after I take the class about powerful questioning and effective communication, I've actually been using it with my 4-year-old, and it's been amazing. I mean, they talk about toddlers and tantrums and this and that, but at the end of the day, it's about having a dialogue. It's about empowering somebody to be able to meet their goals. And sometimes it could be something as small as, I want dessert and I don't want lunch.
Yeah.
You have a goal, you have a goal. How do you find the common goal? How do you incentivize? Right? So anyway, no, to cut to the chase, all jokes aside, but this is not a joke. I really do use a lot of the a lot of the learnings I have on the corporate side, even with my kids. We don't have as many tantrums, honestly, to tell you the truth. It's been a massive change in the past year, ever since the kids are speaking and you can have a dialogue, and now you can discuss where there's a mismatch in goals. Um, and I don't necessarily think that is gentle parenting. It's a little bit different, at least from my understanding from all the other mommy blogs that I've read. But at the end of the day, no, we got a camper van because I had a really challenging job. I love the job. I love what I'm learning. It's an exciting challenge. There's so much room for growth. And I love working on dynamic business challenges, enabling exponential growth. And that was a priority. And I knew that if you're signing up for a challenge, you got to make time for it to focus. So, but I also wanted the quality time with my kids. And my husband and I actually sat down and we were like, okay, so we kind of brainstormed over a beer after the kids went to bed one day, and we were like, okay, well, what do we really want in life? And it was just a few bullets. It was a conversation, and I think it was almost a year and a half ago that we came up with this idea of like, hey, let's get a camper van because that way, because we used to go backpacking before we had kids and before we were married, and we loved that. Like, and I used to just come back to work so refreshed, so energized. And it used to really propel me to be more successful at work too. And we wanted to continue to do some sense of that, but we didn't know how. Because how do you manage pitching a tent and set everything up, tear it down, etc., just with a 9-month-old baby and a 2.5-year-old running around with hazards, right? So the logistics weren't going to work. So anyway, we thought, okay, let's get a camper van. But then we just let the idea sit. We didn't act on it. And then 5 months later, it was about to be springtime, and then things we just started feeling like we weren't getting the quality time with kids again, and we're like, hey, let's just act on our action plan, and we did. We found a camper van, and the best part was it's actually an old Vanagon, and of course, being engineers, we made this engineering problem. We're like, here's all the specs to minimize our setup and tear down time. And ability to, not have limitations on where you camp and where you can drive and where you can park because you're traveling with 2 young kids. And a lot of times, going camping it's a high barrier, mentally for a lot of parents because it's like there's a lot of uncertainty. It's like, oh, but this could go wrong and that could go wrong. So I guess we flipped it and we said, hey, how do we maximize flexibility so that I don't have to make decisions and I don't have to consider the constraints? So we flipped the problem. We got a camper van. It's an older camper van, but there's nothing else that has that much utility and that much square footage and maximizes flexibility. And it's been a little bit over a year since we've got this camper van, and it enables us to just get away sometimes even for a day, like Friday evening and then come back by Saturday afternoon. And the kids have had no TV.
Yeah.
Everybody's just gotten fresh air. We got quality time. It's quality over quantity. And we've been able to go to a lot of amazing remote places that honestly, if we didn't have the camper one, it might not even be feasible to do. Like last year, we did a trip out to Olympic National Park. It's one of the most magical places I've ever been. The whole river. Um, I probably don't even want to talk too much about it because then there's going to be a lot of people going there. But but there's not many hotels to stay at, honestly. You'd have to camp. So most people don't go because it's pretty remote. It's just been an amazing change. It's a shift. But I had a barrier
Hmm.
in my mind about strategizing this way because I didn't know anybody else who did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, wait, but what if the van breaks down? And what if this happens? And what if that happens? Because I'm not inclined mechanically to do the fixes. My husband is to some extent, but still, he's not a professional. But then it's just a risk mitigation strategy. So we're like, okay, well, let's get a ham radio license. What are the things that could possibly go wrong that are the most often? And make sure we have spare parts for those things. And the last trip we did, actually, the battery died when we were on I-5, and we had to pull over to go to an automotive store to get it fixed. But it was fine. Like, we did it. We took care of it, and it wasn't an issue. And yeah, so I think it's just a willingness to step into the unknown, the willingness to pause, take a breath, and say, yeah, there's uncertainty, but how can we peel the layers to understand what is within your control and what is not? Because at the end of the day, the choice would have been to not do this at all or to do it and lean into that uncertainty. Because I wasn't willing to just, I don't know, I guess spend my whole weekend driving my kids around to classes. It doesn't sound fun to me at all. And my son told me he doesn't want to do classes. He wants to spend time with us. So I was like, okay, well, we both meet our goals. We just got to come up with a creative plan.
Wow. Yeah, that was such a rich and beautiful answer. Oh my gosh. I feel like we could have a whole other episode, but I will say a couple of things about that. I have a follow-up question. First of all, I really want to be in the room. I don't think I've hung out very much with you and your kids recently. Um, but I really want to be in the room when you're having one of these conversations with your children that you're using like corporate communication strategies for. I think that sounds lovely. But I also I'd love to hear from your perspective, and you spoke to this a little bit. What do you think? It seems like you've really like you're very thoughtful, and both you and your husband have very demanding jobs, but you made the time to sit down and intentionally figure out what kind of life do you want, and then what are you going to do to actually make it happen? What's it worth for you, right? What do you think prevents people with jobs like yours and your husband's and, lifestyles, especially living in the Silicon Valley and working here? What do you think prevents people from actually doing that?
I think it's going to be a different answer for everybody, right? And I think it's also a time dimensional answer because I think, at least for me, there's always something new that might overwhelm you,
Hmm.
and you need to make time to just pause, breathe, and evaluate. Wait, what is it about this thing that seems overwhelming? Rather than just trying to act right away. It hasn't been easy coming up with this plan that works for us. But the common theme among all of it has just been communication and teamwork. I do feel that, I think my husband and I met in towards the end of our college days, and we had actually signed up. We had done RIT has this like 48-hour startup challenge, and so me, my husband, and a couple other of our friends, good friends actually, did a startup challenge for 48 hours where we had slept maybe 4 hours total in that 48-hour window. But even doing an activity like that with your life partner pushes you to the limit, which means that you know your boundaries and it requires excellent communication in order to partner to achieve a common goal or to understand how maybe your goals are a little bit different so you could help out each other and support each other, right? And I think we've just, and like us backpacking together or like doing a lot of adventure trips, it requires a lot of collaboration, right? So I think we've had practice, a lot of practice there, um, with a different context. It wasn't with kids,
Mm.
but it was still with adventures. And there were other variables involved because there were different friends joining us on the trips. And sometimes it could be as simple as, hey, you're backpacking and somebody just wants to go way faster, but then the other person has, what is it called? The elevation. When you reach like about 8,000, 10,000 feet, you can get elevation sickness.
Mhm.
And then they need to go at like 5% of their normal speed. And how do you manage a full group and make sure everybody has their supplies, etc. So I just think being intentional to practice the communication and collaboration. I think that's what's important
Yeah.
and vulnerable, actually, going back to the first point, because if you never shared openly what you're struggling with, how would somebody even know to support you? um, I think early on with my partner, I'm sure that I was like, wait, can't you tell that's what I was expecting you to do? I was thinking it.
Yeah.
And he was like, what? How am I supposed to know if you don't verbalize it, right?
Mhm.
Oh, right. You've got to verbalize it. You've got to communicate, right? Otherwise, how do you partner?
Yeah, yeah. I think we do that a lot, not just personally, but in the professional space as well. And a lot of what you just said actually applies, I think, to leadership and to work, right? Communication, being comfortable with the unknown, like figuring out your own boundaries, your own constraints, and then strategically kind of partnering with other people, collaborating to work through them. I think that makes a lot of sense. Sneha, just to wrap us up, what advice do you have for someone who is just starting out their career and is aspiring, or maybe not just starting out, but aspiring to be a leader at some point in their career journey?
Um, I would say leadership is more something you do and not something you are. So I would say start small. And I'm going to give you a quick story on this one. I will refer to my older son again. Actually, this weekend, he wanted to have a play date with a friend. And I was like, okay. And then they made a big mess. They played with everything. Everything was everywhere. And then at the end, they were about to walk away and do something else. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I had to ask my son. He's like, hey, you wanted to do this. You're in charge of this whole space and this time. Um, you need to be the leader to make sure everything goes back in place. And then you get to have how many of our play dates you want. You can invite how many of our friends you want. You're in charge. It's up to you. So and he was like, the first instinctual reaction was, but I didn't make all this mess. And I just paused. I didn't say anything. And then he reflected and suddenly was like, okay. Because it suddenly connected. Wait, if my goal is I want to have a lot of fun with my friends all the time, that means I'm in charge of cleaning up too. Okay, fine. And that was that. Suddenly he was on the move. He encouraged his friend to help him, and he cleaned up as well, and all was good. And then it was just an expectation that was set, and that involved holding a boundary and enabling him to meet his goal, but also him stepping into it. I think with leadership, you could start small. Anybody, if you're in high school, middle school, college, um, or working, look in your local community, look in anybody who you're looking to mentor, enable, um, and support. And so I think, and then that just sets the example, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's setting an example as well on how you're going to step into taking that accountability. So I would just say start small. You could do this anywhere.
Mm, beautiful advice. Sneha, thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your expertise. And if there's anything else you'd like to share.
Not particularly. I think, I would also say, you were talking about podcasts. I think the one that also comes to my mind is Brene Brown.
Mm,
She talks about vulnerability, and she did a
mm,
TED talk, and she also writes about it. But then she also talks about how uh, she got into research about vulnerability, but then what led her there was the research about shame. And it relates back to, how do you step into anything that you do authentically and
mm.
speak truth to power. So I would say also Brene Brown is a great resource.
Yes, I also really like Brene Brown and her podcast. I One of the books that I think has really shaped my own perspective on leadership was The Courage. I think it's called The Courage to Lead. I think that's the book by Brene Brown. It's a beautiful book. And her more recent one, Atlas of the Heart. I think they're both very, very beautiful books. I Thank you so much, Sneh, for your time today and for sharing your gifts with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. Appreciate it.